Greetings, everyone. Thank you for being with us again. This week, we dedicate a whole session to definitive technology. Joining us today are our very own top guys at Definitive Technology. We have Matt Lyons, our chief engineer for definitive technology based out of the engineering facility in Baltimore in East Coast. And we have Michael Greco, our senior director of category management, Loudspeakers, also from Sound United, who is based in the West Coast in Vista, California. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm happy that you are joining us again today, and thanks for your time. I am Frederick. I am joining you from Hong Kong, and both Phil and Jim will be co-hosting today. So I'm handing the floor to you guys.
Matt, let's talk about the definitive experience. What is that all about?
The definitive experience is a listening experience that really envelops you, draws you in, and creates that emotional connection to what you're listening to. And there are 10 octaves in the musical spectrum, from 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz. It is very difficult, physics being what it is, it's very difficult to truly reproduce deep bass and do it in an accurate way. So it's something we strive for all the time at Definitive. The next thing I would talk about is dynamic range. You know, from the softest softs to the loudest louds, our ear-brain system has a tremendous ability to resolve dynamic range. That's why the decibel scale is actually logarithmic, because we have such wide dynamic range. The last piece of the definitive experience to me is actually visual. It's not auditory. It's that we always endeavor to design a loudspeaker which visually is worthy of how beautiful the speaker sounds. I like to say it's easy to design a loudspeaker that's maybe ugly. It's harder to make a beautiful loudspeaker that actually sounds amazing.
What are some of the technologies that we use to bring this obsession that you have to life? And it's obsession in a good way, not in a negative way, Matt, as a compliment. You have an obsession for definitive, and it shows. So what are some of the technologies that you use?
So definitely, I love our phrase, what obsession sounds like. I think all of us in the Definitive team are very passionate about what we do, and it does border on obsession. So anytime you're designing a loudspeaker, you always have to start off with the ingredients, and the ingredients are going to affect the meal that you're creating. Now, obviously, everything that we design for Definitive, you'll see, you know, the near ubiquitous use of the same key technologies in the aluminum dome tweeter, the BDSS driver technology. It's in our outdoor speakers, passive radiators in an outdoor speaker. That's crazy. Nobody else does that. Bass radiators. So no, every product that we design is always about providing that definitive experience, right, wherever the application is.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I want to point out, Matt, that you said, and I wrote it down because I think this is so important. You said solving problems in an elegant way. Mm-hmm. And that's one of your key tenets for Definitive, right? It's not part of the brand, but it is because of what your obsession, really.
It's about, I mean, this to me goes the whole way back to when Michael talks about the unboxing experience. The definitive experience starts when you open up that cardboard box, and the emotional connection we want to make to you is that this is a precision engineered piece that is just, everything that we do is to excite and evolve the emotional experience with the product. So everything has to be that level of precision and that level of, we care so much about what we do that we think about every step.
Thanks, Matt.
Now Michael, the reason why we brought Michael and Matt here is because we want to give you the product development side and the engineering side. So, and like I said, there's what Michael's team, when it comes to design and marketing and merchandising, needs, and then there's what the sound that Matt is trying to achieve. So Michael, can you talk a little bit about that balance between the price points and design and all that stuff, because we've talked about that, trying to find that balance before. I thought you do a pretty good job of explaining that.
Yeah, I mean, there there's always trade-offs. There's always compromises, right? And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to deliver on that definitive experience with the fewest amounts of compromises, but we're also trying to achieve a specific price point, right? Because we talk about this where, yeah, if I had unlimited dollars, unlimited time, unlimited engineering resources, yes, I could keep building stuff forever, and it would be very expensive, might be very large, might not be too practical. So again, everything we do is kind of also within kind of those constraints of I need to make something that somebody can afford, they can fit in their home, and at the same time, it looks amazing and sounds amazing. And so there always are these kind of trade-offs. And so, but one of the things that we do, even when we do have these compromises, is that we want to make sure we're true to the definitive experience. So, that's why you don't find plastic parts on the, we got rid of all the plastic parts when we went from BP 8000 to BP 9000. It's real aluminum, they're real premium touch points. We don't compromise on the out-of-box experience because Matt talked about this, right? Your experience starts at the retail shop when you get that first demo and you go, wow, I want these. And then you get them home and it continues from there. And that's why that out-of-box experience is so important. And then you set it up the first time and you get it in your room, you play that first piece of music or that first movie, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. And then, of course, what do you do? You start tweaking it, right? You start moving it around to kind of make sure you get what you want to fit your room. But it's all about delivering on the experience given kind of the economic and retail parameters that we have to work within. And it's a balance. And that's where what that does, that tension between kind of trying to build something that looks amazing and sounds amazing, but works within these economic and retail realities, is that causes us to be more creative and more thoughtful in what we do. And we actually spend more time trying to solve these problems elegantly, as we talk about, right? So that we don't just can't throw money at the problem. And we don't just want to say, oh, we're going to forget about it, we're going to compromise and not live up to the DT standard. So what it does is it forces everybody to be more thoughtful and more critical in their thinking to deliver on something such as the BP 9000 or the Demand Series.
So anytime you're designing a loudspeaker, you always have to start off with the ingredients, and the ingredients are going to affect the meal that you're creating. So we talked about the broad frequency response. So let's start by talking about our tweeter. And tweeters have characteristic sounds, which even with crossover design, they're still always going to have an integral part of what the sound of the loudspeaker is. So definitive, we've always used metal dome tweeters. In specific, we have our annealed aluminum dome tweeter. And the tweeter itself is very important, and the characteristics of a metal dome tweeter are such that they reproduce the timbre of what you're listening to, but they do so in a very accurate and realistic way. Of course, it's very important. Sometimes metal dome tweeters can be too bright and can be too tizzy. So we have, over the years, put tremendous amounts of time into engineering our tweeter, and actually the annealing process. So what's anneal mean? Well, it's actually about taking a metal dome tweeter and making it softer through forming it. And when you think about aluminum, I think the emotional reaction to that is sort of like hard and brittle. But the aluminum dome tweeter is actually very soft, very subtle. It's very light, and you can actually dent it very easily. It's very fragile. And that's because we work hard to soften it, which is what the annealing process talks about. The next thing is with the tweeter, it's actually married to a silk dome surround, which damps out the edges and of course gives it the throw that it needs. So that's a key piece of our ingredients on our transducer is the aluminum dome tweeter.
If you look at the tweeter, not only is it aluminum, I'm not sure if we covered what is the little thing in front of the tweeter, the waveguide. I'm not sure if we talked about that. Did we?
I don't think we did. So the design element in front of the tweeter is meant to optimize the frequency response and the dispersion of the tweeter by aligning the phase response of the signals coming from different points on the dome. We call it the 2020
lens. We call it, yeah.
All the tweeters are the 1-inch dome, but we have over the years optimized that design element. It's very critical, and in manufacturing, it's critical to get the distance between the dome and the faceplate exactly right, so that you get the same extended high frequency response.
I think we call it the wave alignment lens or something like that, right?
Yes. What is the official name?
Wave alignment lens, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And on demand, it's 2020, because you'll notice it is slightly different on the demand series.
The next thing I think I would talk about would be our drivers. And we have very unique technology in our drivers with the BDSS. And so it's a dual suspension design. You have the outside surround, but you also have, and this is very unique to Definitive, at the inside of the voice coil, we have another suspension on the inside. What that enables us to do is to have a lot of linear throw, a lot of distance and displacement so that the transducer can move across. And what that does for us, it gives us that wide dynamic range that we're talking about with very little distortion. The other thing that's unique about our driver technology is the use of our linear waveguide. And the linear response waveguide is the element in the center. And what that does is it smooths the frequency response and gives it a broader spray of sound, such that when you're off axis, it still sounds as good as it does when you're on axis. That's a critical component to creating that large sound field that we strive so hard to get at Definitive. So lastly, and now we're talking about the bass here, is there are two key elements in Definitive. We spend a lot of time designing our low frequency transducers, and we make heavy use of bass radiators. And bass radiators is a design approach wherein it actually, it is not a sealed box, right? It has a characteristic roll-off of a vented system, but we don't use ported systems. Most loudspeakers are ported, and what a port is imagine a plastic tube, and it has a slug of air within the tube, and that is used to augment the low frequency radiation below the subwoofer. The problem with that design approach is you also used to have an 8-inch, 10-inch, or 12-inch woofer, but port tubes tend to be very small in diameter, so you can tune them low. So the way a port works is you have this, think of a cork of air inside the port, and it has to move incredibly far to try to keep up with the subwoofer driver. What that creates is two unwanted problems. The first is distortion. As that slug of air moves in and out, you get a lot of chuffing and you get a lot of distortion. That prevents us from being able to play these wide dynamic ranges without distortion. The other problem with a port tube is it's an organ pipe, so it plays notes by itself that are not in the the music that you're listening to. So instead, we use bass radiators, and it is a design approach where you actually have a physical surface, like a driver without a magnetic structure. You can see it here in the center. That's the big, huge magnet that's on the subwoofer driver. Right next to it, you see the bass radiators, and they are driven entirely by the acoustic mass inside, by the acoustic volume inside the cabinet. Bass radiators, to me, are integral to the Definitive sound. They give a tight, round sound to the bass. Just imagine when you're listening to upright bass with the boom, 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 that kind of tight, round sound. It's wonderfully reproduced by the bass radiator technology. So we use that as an integral part to what we create. So those are the key ingredients to the Definitive sound that you'll find.
When I first saw the towers, the D15 and D17, I went, wow, they look very different than the BP 9000s. And I assume that they're completely different. But Matt, can you talk about that a little bit? How did these come to be and why? Why do they exist?
So the Demand series has been an incredibly exciting project to work on. What we have in the Demand series, so you'll note that we have some of the key technologies in the BDSS driver and the aluminum tweeter, same design elements. What we wanted to do with Demand is, let's go back to our three tenets. So we want incredibly wide dynamic range. We want incredibly deep bass response and extended highs. And then we, of course, wanted an incredibly immersive sound field. So one of the things you're going to notice, there are two key differences between demand and BP. The first is demand are direct radiators. There are no transducers on the back. The other key difference, we do not have amplifiers built in for the bass, but they are three-way designs. And we developed a new carbon fiber woofer for the system. So why do we do that? What were we trying to achieve? Well, first and foremost, let's talk about the bass. And it is really awesome to have built-in powered subwoofers. We talked about all the benefits of that. But we also realize that if you are, say, a customer who has a wonderful, like my favorite is the Marantz PM10, incredibly high performance electronics, we wanted to create a speaker line that would enable you to use this high performance electronics over the entire frequency response of the system. So we said we're going to take the amp out, but then we went in and we designed a bass system that gives you that incredibly deep dynamic experience, but doesn't require an amplifier. So it was a real challenge acoustically to achieve that. And when you listen to the D15, I love to watch people listen to the D15 and they're just blown away by how deep and how accurate and how musical the bass is. And I can now listen to my D15s with my Marantz PM10 and just hear the magic of those electronics over the entire spectrum. The other thing that we did that was different is we went to a direct radiator. And so you get a different sense of the ambient sound field with demand than you do with BP. And what you get with demand is more resolution and more refinement to the location of the musical sources throughout the image. And so that's a different experience, but it's still a definitive experience. What I like about demand is, and some of this becomes, as everything in loudspeakers does, it's about personal preference. The experience I like about demand is I'm a huge classical music fan, and the precision of the location of the image in demand, it's more highly focused than is the BP sound field. So you can hear the location of the first violin, the last violin, and hear the stretch the whole way across there. So it's a more intimate relationship with the imaging than is BP. The other analogy I like to use is when you go to a concert hall, there are lots of seats in a concert hall. There are seats that are further back and seats that are up close. In concert hall acoustics, we talk about the critical distance in a concert hall, and that's the distance back from the stage where the direct sound is equal in level to the ambience that you're hearing from the concert hall. So I've always preferred to sit right at about the critical distance. In demand, what we're giving you is a seat in the concert hall that's closer to the stage, and what the BP gives you is a seat in the concert hall that's a little bit further back. So they work different in different applications, different experiences, but it's still a uniquely definitive experience. And that's what we wanted to achieve with demand, just a slightly different experience in resolution and refinement. Michael, does that capture it, do you think?
I think so, very much so.
I
like the visual, I think helps people to kind of think about it.
Yeah. And I will say, I want to touch on a couple of points as testimonials. The first thing you said is great bass and easy to drive. That's kind of one of the things that Definitive is known for. The amount of bass that comes out of these cabinets, even though they're pretty small, they're small for the amount of bass that these cabinets can generate. And you can drive them. You don't need some monstrous amplifier to drive a Definitive speaker. So one of the very first time I had the opportunity to hear a pair of D17s was I did a custom integration rep show, and they wanted to show the new D17s in a pretty big room. And they also said, hey, could you connect it to the new little Denon 2-channel receiver, the little integrated receiver, the DRA 800? How much is that retail for, Mike? Michael, do you remember? $500. So we're $500. Yeah, so we're driving these speakers. Michael helped work on that project, and we were driving these speakers on a $500 Denon 2-channel, which punches above its weight as well. And the first thing people came in was, oh my God, that's the most amazing. That sounds great. Is that a new? Do those have powered subs? And we're like, no, it's being driven by that $500
Right.
receiver, and people were absolutely shocked at the bass performance in this large room from these two speakers on that receiver. So it really showed the point. The next thing was when they first saw it. Jim is anti-white speakers until he saw the definitive ones, and I think now he's kind of a believer in the white ones, right, Jim?
Well, to be clear, it's the D15s in white. It's not that I've completely gone away from wanting black speakers or dark wood speakers. That's what I like. That's what I'm drawn to. White has never appealed to me over the years until I saw the D15s, and their sound for their size it's just impressive, awe-inspiring. I'm blown away by those speakers.
Yeah. And when we play
and
the big
aesthetics.
ones, yeah, and like at CES this year, Michael had us set up a pair of D17s and a pair of D15s in one of the suites, and we would play the big ones first, and then we would go and we would play the smaller ones, and the characteristics are identical, very, very close, but the form factor was smaller. If you have a bigger room and you're trying to fill a bigger room, you can definitely go to a pair of D17s. But what was impressive was the amount of output and the impact and the dynamics that were coming from the smaller towers. And also, like I said, that white's finish, Mike touched on it before. The finish is the amount of care that goes into the finish of these speakers, like you were talking about how many coats of paint that's required to get that finish, on the white and the black.
Yeah, we do there's 6 coats of paint. So it's not just like you're painting a fence and you apply a coat, wait an hour, apply another coat. It's you apply the coat and then it's polished to get that high polish. So you let it dry, you polish it, and then you apply another coat. So it's finishing off the cabinets. So we have a high gloss black, high gloss white. It takes a fair amount of time. Also, and also the aluminum. So those are all aluminum panels. Those front panels are that the whole panel is aluminum. You'll notice there's no seam, so it's a single piece. It's not joined together. And then the texturing of the aluminum is very specifically thought through. So again, it's all about little detail. When you look at the tweeter faceplate, you'll notice that there's a thin ring of aluminum around that as a highlight. Every little detail is paid attention to, and all of that takes not only time to design, but then takes time to manufacture. And so what you're paying for is that we call it the definitive experience, but it's all those little details together.
Yeah. Anybody who's ever painted a car or has ever had a car painted knows that the hardest color to paint a car is black, because if you don't get that finish even, it will call attention to itself rapidly. So
right, you'll
black
see no
high
orange
gloss,
peel, right?
yeah.
When you look at car finishes and things that are high gloss, you'll see, oh, do you see any orange peel, right? Which is that texturing that you can see on the if you buy a more inexpensive car, oftentimes you'll see that, and it's just because that's the nature of what's going on. And you won't see any of that here. It's mirror-like sheen. There's a scale, I forget what it is, that actually rates the how much mirror likeness it has, for lack of a better description. And these are very high on that scale because of the level of care that goes into them.
And the other one, Matt, I want to point out is we mentioned that there's an aluminum face, but anybody go try to get a magnet and stick it to a soda can, it's not gonna stick, because magnets don't stick to aluminum. But if you look at it, there's no pins and things to on the front to hold the grill, because that would affect the cosmetics. This is an example of being obsessive when it comes to design. How do you make a magnetic grill stick to an aluminum face, Matt?
So what the mechanical engineers did is they actually machined a pocket behind the aluminum, and there are other magnets that are behind it. And you could say, well, that's kind of crazy. Why are you doing that? but I'm looking at my D17s across the room right now. I always have the grills off them. And we wanted to create a smooth, seamless aesthetic to match the smooth, seamless sound that the product creates. But it's not just about the design. The aluminum baffles are integral to the enclosure itself to minimize any bending, any vibrations. And at the same time, that creates both a visual and a sonic marriage that gives you the definitive experience of just precision and envelopment, both visual and auditory.
The other attention, okay, and I love how you just kind of put the magnet, the grill kind of like close to the speaker, and it just click, and it just aligns itself. I love that. And the other thing too is it has its the base radiators, but you wanted to on a white cabinet, just having these big, huge black circles on the side would have also affected the cosmetics. So what are kind of unique about those base radiators, Michael? Like on the white ones.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to direct that towards Matt to talk about base radiator technology, but that's fine.
I'm sharing the love.
So, yeah. So again, it goes back to, so part of it is the aesthetic, but then, and let Matt talk about the actual technology, because they did a lot of work on those base radiators to produce the definitive bass sound. But those actually are painted, but they're metal, right, Matt? And so they have aluminum trim rings around them. So one of the challenges you have is oftentimes is that when you have differing materials, you need them to match, right? So everybody's bought, like I always refer to like old iPod accessories, right, where white is not really white, right? There's different shades of white. So one of the things that you'll actually see is that, is again, everything matches, but those were intentionally done that way because part of that definitive experience is to highlight the bass performance. And so this in this speaker, it's not a ported system, it's using bass radiators, and so this is an example where we wanted to highlight that capability because it's very important to the definitive sound. And also we also want, again, it goes back to everything has to be beautiful. So when you look at the side of that, that doesn't look like a traditional bass radiator that you would see in a speaker.
And
the other thing about, I got to just say, so I've never designed before a bass radiator with a metal cone. These things to get that bass, we spent a tremendous amount of time, and we invested in the loudspeaker a tremendous amount of resources, i.e. meaning we spent a lot of money on radiators to truly get that sound and get the bass out of a system without the amplification. So just a tremendous achievement by the whole team and what they were able to get. And like I said, the bass out of these speakers is just jaw-dropping. It's amazing. So I'm sorry, Phil. I have to mention this because it's one of my favorite parts of the demand speaker, and it actually has to do with the tweeter. We talk about the rectilinear design of the definitive design ethos, and that creates challenges for us. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure of is we talk about that imaging. We talk about the precise pinpoint imaging of the system. And you'll notice that that the tweeter is offset in the design, right? And there's a very specific reason that we did that. Is you can get real problems with something called diffraction. It's probably an acoustic term many have heard about. And what diffraction is the sound radiates from the tweeter dome, and the sound moves out across the baffle, and then it reaches the edge of the cabinet. The edge of the cabinet then becomes like little unwanted sound sources which blur the image, and they screw up the location of the sound sources within that image. So what we did is we actually dramatically offset the location of the tweeter, and we created a unique model for left and a unique model for right. And that was all about creating that definitive image and the precision that we were looking for with demand. And everyone was like, well, we can't do that because the retailers won't like it. I'm like, we have to do this, otherwise the product won't sound the way it needs to. And so that's one of the things I'm very proud of in the demand series. As a team, we put this is the obsession part, right? So no, we have to do this. I understand that it's going to be challenging, but we have to achieve our sonic goals, and we must do this this enhancement in order to achieve our sonic goals. And Michael actually put up with us on that. And he's the one who has to listen to the retailers complain about separate lefts and rights. Then
yeah, they don't complain that much. Although the box is big when you put 2 of those in a box.
Don't do that.
My favorite hack, to use that phrase, is I remember when we came out when I was working with our team in Europe, and they came back and said, you know, I've listened, instead of putting the left speaker over here with the tweeter on the outside and the right speaker over here with the tweeter on the outside, you should listen to the speakers both with the tweeter on the outside and also with the tweeter on the inside by switching left and right. In certain rooms with different amounts of reverberation, it will change the performance. And I've for instance, in my living room where I'm listening to these, I have the tweeters on the inside because it tweaked the performance better in my space. So, and feel free to do that. It's not like it's going to do anything wrong. So
we just had to label them left and right for the manuals, and also so that you don't get shipped 2 lefts or 2 rights from a retailer.
Yeah, 2 lefts don't make a right, right?
Correct.
Now
but again, I think the important thing though that Matt was talking about is not just the tweeter, but just, you know, a lot of this is in your space, right? You keep going back to in your space, right? Position them, and then after, there is no hard and fast rule that says they have to be this amount of toe in and this far apart and so forth. We give you guidelines to start, but ultimately you should experiment in your space with toe in, position from the wall, how far apart, and so forth. And then in this instance, you have other options. Like you said, you could reverse them so the tweeters are either on inside or the outside. So, but it's all about so that you get the experience that you want. And we're just trying to make sure that you start with the best options.
Okay, Leonidas asks, doesn't the offset tweeter give a slightly different dispersion pattern from the left to the right for each speaker?
Well, it actually gives better dispersion because of the reduction in diffraction. So it gives smoother off-axis response.
Okay, now the other thing that I want to cover, and then we'll go back and talk about some of the other comments and answer some of the questions, is we want to also tackle the things, we talked about all the things you see, the offset tweeter, the metal base radiators, the carbon fiber woofers, the BDS drivers, but there was also a lot of care that went into the cabinet. So can you talk a little bit about things like the crossover and even all of the bracing in the internals inside of this cabinet to show the care that went into the evolution of the speaker?
Yeah, so it's incredibly important that you're building a large box, and these are MDF cabinets. The last thing that you want is your MDF cabinet to start being its own wood block and resonating and putting energy into the sound that is not correlated to the music input. So we do a tremendous amount of computer modeling. We do a lot of measurements actually of the vibration of the panels themselves to minimize that effect. And it's critical to any loudspeaker design. Of course, having the aluminum baffle creates a stiffer, less resonant element when it's married to the diverse material of the MDF itself. So you have to have a loudspeaker cabinet that doesn't resonate. And so when you look at the cross section, we spend a lot of time and energy with the placement of the braces and damping everything out in the cabinet. A crossover is what I love about Demand is we really invested in the highest quality parts, polypropylene capacitors, air core inductors, and all of these parts maximize the performance of the system. They're much more expensive, but they're integral to getting the overall blending in the system itself, and at the same time that you don't have any problems like less expensive inductors squash dynamic range. Cheaper capacitors screw up the ambient presentation and the transient response of the system. And then we spared no expense when it came to when do we want to have more filters? Can we spend a little bit more money on this product and put a notch filter here to get rid of this one artifact, which when I listen to this one particular cut and this one particular singer, I hear this anomaly that I don't want to hear. So we spent a tremendous amount of time, we invested a tremendous amount of our development, our BOM costs into the crossover to make these things sound the way they do. And that was one of the things that was really cool about Demand Series, is we were allowed to use those resources to really push the envelope of the overall performance.
I will admit, because the first thing Michael brought over when you guys were developing it, a crossover that sat on my desk, and the thing was massive. The amount, you could tell the amount of care that went into that crossover design is apparent. Just by seeing what was inside of the cabinet showed the obsession to sound. Now there's also some other components like we talk a lot about the towers, but there's also the center channel, as well as a series of bookshelf speakers. So you do have a full lineup there, right?
Absolutely. I mean, and the whole idea here was, you can get a 2-channel system, right? Anything from a small book the whole way up to the D17 tower, but everything is designed with the same acoustic elements. Everything is voiced to the same targets, so that you can get not only a great sounding 2-channel system, but also a great surround sound system with the demand line.
Of course, if you want to use a height speaker, which you still in ceiling, you would still recommend the DI series. Yeah. Okay.
And you can also use the D7, can be wall mounted. That's another option.
Just
so
to
go ahead, Jim.
let you know, the D7 does not take a 1/4-20 thread. It's too heavy. It's a bigger thread. The threaded insert on the back is larger. And it's failing me right now, but I think it's, yeah, there it is, at 3/8 by 16. Thanks, Michael.
I'm here to help.
I just wanted to point that out because typically the wall brackets you see are 1/4-20 threads. That speaker's way too heavy.
Yeah.
Even that little tiny thing.
Yeah, and then the D7 is pretty much the only one of the demands that uses a base port to keep its size more compact. But the larger bookshelves actually still use a base radiator, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and they fire up.
So there is grill cloth across the top, but it is not removable.
There's been one of the requests that we get from sales is, can we pull the grill off? Because everybody wants to show it, but you can't get to it. But that affects the how clean the appearance of the cabinet would be if you made it removable.
Yeah,
well, not only that, but it's also an example of just trade-offs, right? To make a removable grill, then you need to think about a magnet system. You need to think about how it's going to be handled. And so this is an example of where we basically decided, where do we want to spend our money, right? We want to spend our money in giving you the base response that you would expect in a small book, but we also want to make sure that aesthetically it's very clean and elegant. So that's an example where, yes, we could absolutely have a removable grill, but the question was, is that something that the consumer is willing to pay for and they value, or is this something where we can take that money and put it somewhere else in the speaker and give that consumer more value? And so that's a perfect example where we had lots of discussions internally about something like as simple as, do you make the top grill removable or not? And we chose not to, because we wanted to actually take that money, because it would cost money, and spend it somewhere else in the product at the time. And so that's just a good example of where we are constantly having to evaluate where to put value and what's going to be most important to delivering on the definitive experience.
We'd like to thank Michael and Matt, and of course Frederick, Jim, and Jen for helping with the presentation. And hopefully you've learned a lot about the thought process that goes into the Definitive's speaker lineup, regardless of whether you're looking at floor standers, bookshelves, satellite speakers, or even a sound bar. A lot of these ideas when it comes to design and how they operate and how they sound carries all the way across the brand. So for those who have to leave, take care, and we will talk to you soon.